Warm welcome to the programme with me, David Foster. With a population of less than 10 million and regularly appearing way down the list of wealthy nations, Belarus has never been a great mover and shaker in world affairs. But the protests there now against a president in power for more than a quarter of a century could have global implications. This is Roundtable. Less than a 9-hour drive to Moscow and a former Soviet republic, Belarus is a country that Russia is desperate to keep in its orbit. Now President Putin's offering military assistance to his beleaguered opposite number, Alexander Lukashenko.
President Alexander Lukashenko has ruled Belarus for 26 years. He is often characterized as Europe's last dictator. Lukashenko's re-election in early August proved controversial after claiming he had won 80% of the vote. Since August 9th, hundreds of thousands of people have joined protests calling for an end to the president's rule. Public anger has intensified as thousands of people were detained in the post-election crackdown, and stories of torture, beating and abuse emerged. Many experts say neighbouring Russia holds the key to what happens next. The two presidents were in close contact straight after the election. Vladimir Putin announced he would send a police reserve force to intervene if the situation got out of control. But he is unlikely to want a repeat of Ukraine, where protests were followed by the annexation of Crimea and a war in the east. Western countries, despite talks of sanctions, are reluctant to get involved in Belarus, so as not to provoke Russian intervention. But what happens next could have consequences in Belarus and beyond its borders.
Very pleased to say that joining us out of Liverpool in the UK, we have Alexandra Murphy from the Minsk Dialogue think tank that is based in Belarus. She's just arrived from the country, witnessing developments on the ground. Out of Berlin, we say hello to Olga Dryndova, editor at Belarus Analysen Research Centre, that's at the University of Bremen, who's got friends taking part in the protests. And then we travel to Wales, Aberystwyth, where we say hello to Dr. Jenny Mathers, Senior Lecturer in International Politics at Aberystwyth University. You know the rules. You can say whatever you want, whenever you want. I'll just try and guide you. So, Alexandra, let's come to you first of all. A number of journalists have now been banned from Belarus. It's difficult to get a clear picture of what's going on. You had a difficult journey getting home. We may talk about that in just a moment. But before you left, what were your main memories of what was going on?
The main thing is actually the surprise on the ground there and how much the protests have managed to sustain and gain momentum. It's been surprising for international observers, but Belarusians themselves cannot believe what is actually happening. It's been a huge emotional roller coaster for people there the past few weeks. People are filled with hope and then pessimism, and then hope, and then pessimism, and it's exhausting for people on the ground there. But they are incredibly inspired at the moment, and I think you can see this when you look at the protests that are happening. And we've seen women's protests, we've seen students this week protesting, you've seen doctors protesting. So it's all over society, and it's not just in Minsk, which is important to stress. It's all over the entire country.
And there's no sense that any kind of initial momentum's being lost. In fact, you seem to be suggesting it's the other way, it's gaining momentum.
Yes, so every weekend that I have been there since the election, the morning of the Sunday has felt very kind of almost depressing, because the people heading out to the protest every time think this will be it. There will be smaller numbers. We are already being kind of arrested and picked off. And then every week there is this incredible surprise where there are sometimes hundreds of thousands of people on the street. And for people outside watching, for us it's incredible, but for them, they are not expecting this amount of people every week. And so I think that this surprise is also what's helping the momentum be sustained.
And the intimidation which we hear about from forces on the ground, that's not putting people off?
No, actually, the opposite. What I found from being there is that people are not afraid anymore, and I mean, I can tell you that it's very scary when you see these kind of vans without license plates. And you know they're full of men who can come and kind of drag you off the street and they can pick people indiscriminately. I found this incredibly scary, but Belarusians at the moment are far less afraid than they have ever been. And you can see this from videos of people in shorts and t-shirts fighting with OMON, the kind of security services, with face masks and helmets and batons, and people are no longer afraid. And this lack of fear is very threatening for the
Okay,
regime.
Olga, I will come to you in just a moment to talk about what's happened to those people you know who've been involved in the protest. But Jenny, I saw you nodding when Alexandra was talking. Was that in recognition of the fact that there seems to be, it seems to be growing, if anything, the nature of the protest?
Yes, I think both the fact that the protests are growing and building momentum, and that people are losing their fear, but also thinking about how this is all probably playing in Moscow, in the sense that it's much easier for an authoritarian regime to retain its grip on control and on society if society fears it, if people are afraid of the security services. And I think even though the security services have clearly, they've arrested people, they've beaten them, they've tortured them, they've behaved extremely badly. Nevertheless, there is this, as Alexandra said, there's this change in mood in society, and that is really powerful, but also probably really threatening for Moscow.
President Putin has promised military assistance. He said that he'll help with police in whatever way is requested by Lukashenko. Why is he so desperate to keep a grip on this regime? Or perhaps he's not. Perhaps he just wants to keep some kind of friendly relations with Belarus, doesn't matter who it is, when in fact the people are said to be not anti-Russian at all.
Yes, this is a difficult one for Putin because he doesn't want to see Belarus go the way of Ukraine, which had protests that very quickly turned into pro-Western, sort of anti-Russian protests, and then the regime took a very anti-Russian turn. And they don't want to see Belarus go this way. Belarus is important geostrategically because of its location, but also important because of the very strong social and ethnic and linguistic links between the two societies. So Putin wants to keep Belarus in Russia's orbit, more or less. I don't think he's necessarily wedded to Lukashenko as the leader. I think he would be open to other possible leaders, but he definitely wants a regime that's going to retain a close relationship with Moscow.
Olga, tell me about what reaction you're getting from people you know who are taking part in the protests.
Well, what is interesting about this protest is that really we see a lot of people who were never politically engaged or who never showed any interest in election observation or taking part in political protests. But from the information that I get from who I know, it is true. People, I think people are still afraid. At least when I, talking with my friends, of course they're afraid. Of course they're afraid, especially those, the women. They are afraid to be taken to the Belarusian prisons, especially after everything we saw what is happening there with the tortures 3 days, 3 nights after the elections. But what is interesting? They are more afraid of the things that could come after the protests are gone. So they're more afraid of the political developments, of the possible even high repressions if the protests are gone. So, this kind of two types of fears, and they compare it and they say that, okay, this fear, the second fear about political developments, it's higher. And that's why they, so to say, ignore their fear to land in Belarusian prisons and go protest almost actually every week, and some people even every day. And it doesn't have to be on the streets. We've seen also student protests. We've seen a lot of petitions. We've seen crowdfunding campaigns and solidarity campaigns with those who try to organize strikes at state-owned enterprises. And so I can only confirm the information that people are actually they're changing the moods from we will win till we will have to migrate. Of course, it is still happening, but it started also before the elections. And quite a lot of, also business is starting to leave the country, especially in the area of IT sector. I also know people who are working there who are already considering a relocation because it's just not safe to have business now.
I don't know whether we would need to go into at this juncture the reasons why Lukashenko is unpopular. I'll just list a few of them. You can add to them if you wish. Handling of the COVID crisis, very bad. The elections, which were said to be fixed. The protests on the street, a stagnating economy, general miscalculations, and an unwillingness to listen. So let's go. I'll go back to you, Jenny, if I may. I'm going to read out two things, one from Sergei Lavrov and one from Angela Merkel, which show the competing interests here, if you like. Sergei Lavrov, Russian foreign minister. What's happening in Belarus worries us very much. No one is making a secret of the fact that this is about geopolitics, the fight for post-Soviet space. And Angela Merkel says, the people in Belarus know what they want. That's why we want an independent path for Belarus, where the political conditions are decided by the country itself. The fight for post-Soviet space would seem to say that Russia wants to keep its claws very firmly in Belarus, and Angela Merkel is saying independent. That means away from the Kremlin. So how do you think, Jenny, these two competing ideas are going to resolve themselves?
Well, I think the protesters so far have been doing a really good job of trying to walk between these two paths by emphasizing that they're not anti-Russian, by emphasizing their close links to Russia and their desire to continue to have a really good relationship. And also the fact that they've really prevented protesters from carrying EU flags and so on. It's been very, very striking how domestic focused this series of protests has been. So they're trying very hard. I think the difficulty that Moscow has is it does see these things in zero-sum terms. In other words, a loss for one side is a gain for the other side, and really fears and worries about Western influence creeping ever closer, through other former Soviet states. And so it tends to see these developments through this particular kind of a lens. And it can be quite difficult to push it away. But I would say I'm encouraged, at least to some extent, by the fact that Russia has not yet intervened militarily. But there's been talk about it. There's been some sort of veiled threats, but so far we haven't really seen it on the ground.
Well, we'll talk about what it might mean and what Russia might do in just a moment. But Alexandra, let me come back to you on the issue of the military and of the police. Were you at all aware of increasing pressure from the security services who might be getting either instructions maybe from Moscow, or that there might be some people from Moscow on the ground already?
There are, Minsk at the moment is full of rumors about this, but that's all they are at the moment. It's because a lot of people now are taking their news from Telegram. Not everything is verifiable. And so at the moment, a lot of people fear that Russia is already here, but these are rumors, but they're very powerful rumors at the moment. And when you are in Minsk, there is quite a heavy military presence. You would see military vehicles circling the city center, which is obviously there to intimidate. But this, combined with rumors of Russian military intervention, creates a very nervous atmosphere on the ground. But again, they are rumors. I've seen nothing.
No, absolutely. No, I do know that. Olga, do you get the sense that Lukashenko can stay? Or if not, that Russia has already resigned itself to the fact that they're going to have to, if they can, play a game where they get the right possible successor as far as Russia itself is concerned?
Well, of course, it's for the moment being the most interesting question for everybody if Lukashenko will stay. Well, I personally do not believe that he will stay for the whole term, like 5 years. I can imagine that he could stay for some time, but only with assistance coming from Russia. We don't see, we don't see any tendency from the West that show us that he could stay as a legitimate president till the end of the term. I mean, this new formulation by the European Union which is as follows: the results of the elections will not be recognized. It's a kind of a new for the Belarusian reality. So before we only had the elections are not free and fair. So we still don't know what it will mean on practice. What will happen after the inauguration of the president, if it takes place in November? Will that mean that all the agreements and appointments that the president will make actually not be recognized by the West? This question is still open. It's interesting what reaction we'd see from the European Union. And we're talking about Russian support. Well, I think that it's very important for Russia now, well, from my point of view, to preserve the pro-Russian moods in the Belarusian society, which are still there. And if they manage to do that, if they manage, not to intervene with a police force, military, whatever, that would become a very important and actually powerful source for the Russian soft power for the upcoming years. And I think Russia might be interested also in influencing and have an influence on the future presidential candidates in Belarus. So I think I have the impression they're still considering what reaction they should show. It also depends on how Belarusian elites will, what side they would take, because we see that president is not legitimate within the society.
You're talking about political elite?
Yes,
or business elite?
Well, so to say, power, part of this power vertical in Belarus, we're talking about ministries and also local authorities. There have been single cases of people who, so to say, took the side of people and supported the position, but those cases have been only single cases till now. So I think those three factors, like the reaction of the elites, the reaction from Russian, and also the protests, if they continue, because we'll have maybe more or less bad weather in Belarus from September, October, so the weather conditions are not that good for street protests, but we might see some other forms of protests also happening in schools. For example, today is the first day for pupils to come at school, and we're already seeing some conflicts between teachers who presumably falsify the elections and the parents of the people. Okay. So that's still very interesting processes happening within the society, and well, even Russia cannot ignore those processes.
Yeah. Okay. If I may, Jenny, I want to ask you this: if the protests aren't anti-Russian, they're basically anti-Lukashenko. Are there different elements within the opposition that would be acceptable to Moscow or unacceptable to Moscow?
Well, so far, the opposition leaders have been mostly arrested or in exile. And, so the people on the ground have been doing what they can to hold things together. So, I mean, this is what isn't entirely clear at the moment from my vantage point, although the other presenters may know more than I do, is that who exactly will emerge or could emerge from the protest, from the opposition to lead a government. A transition council was created, but its members are being arrested and sort of picked off and taken away, and that's to prevent them from being in a position to negotiate. So it's a very difficult moment, I think, for the protest and for the opposition. But if they can manage to pull together and to not only continue the mass actions in various ways, and they've been wonderfully creative in how they've done it so far, but also present quite a cohesive and coherent pro-Russian alternative leadership available there to replace Lukashenko, then that becomes much more credible.
Yeah, but surely if if the opposition or the main opposition figures are either in exile or have been taken away, and Russia then anoints its favoured successor, it is going to appear that this is nothing other than Russia installing a puppet.
Yes, exactly, and that's a real problem for Russia and a problem for Belarus as well. And so, if Putin is smart, he will avoid something which is so blatant as that. He will try and get some kind of a government which is acceptable to the people. And this is possibly one of the reasons why he's been holding back, because there've been various threats and sort of signals sent, but nothing too heavy-handed yet from Moscow. And so that suggests that they're perhaps looking for an alternative to Lukashenko.
Alexandra, I'm going to come to you in a second, but I'm going to read out something I saw today from John Bolton, former US National Security Advisor. It was a very long article. I've just taken a little bit of it. Multiple conversations between Lukashenko and Vladimir Putin in recent days can only mean that Lukashenko knows his political survival, brackets, and maybe more, end brackets, depends on securing a Kremlin lifeline. Lukashenko may not realize it yet, but seeking Moscow's assistance likely means he is relinquishing power in Minsk, and probably sooner rather than later, which leads me to ask you, who on the ground are people suggesting might take over? Because Jenny was saying it's difficult to know at the moment how the opposition is gathering, but what's the talk there?
Do you mean who could win a next election, or do you mean coordination council, or?
I suppose who could be the next president that would be acceptable to Moscow and perhaps also acceptable to the West?
I mean, from the whole process, I mean, Viktor Barbarica was easily the most popular candidate in Belarus. He was not able to actually run for president in the end. He was arrested before, but he collected, I think it was around 400,000 signatures in support of his candidacy, which is the highest amount ever collected by an opposition candidate. And so I think he would be in with a very, very strong chance. He was.
Can I ask you this, acceptable to Moscow or unacceptable?
This is it, because he was painted both inside Belarus as being the pro-Russia candidate and the pro-EU candidate, and he was very careful to toe this line of I am pro-Belarus. He was very much in favor of reducing economic dependency on Russia, but also he was the head of a Russian bank, so there are ties there. But on the other hand, he was very pro-Belarusian culture, which a lot of people see as being a way of ensuring Belarus's independence from Russia, as in highlighting the differences between the two countries as such. So it's very difficult to say at the moment, but I think he could potentially be a candidate that both Russia and the EU, and most importantly, Belarusians themselves, could get behind.
Okay. Olga, you may want to add to that list and nominate somebody else. I don't know. But what I really wanted to ask you is, if this is the end game for Lukashenko, surely the easy way out is for somebody to say, look, you can leave the country, go into exile, whatever you want to call it, go on holiday for a long time. There will be no prosecutions, etc., etc. Do you think that's a possibility?
I think that is exactly what people are talking about. If you see, these posters, I still did not mention Belarusian political humor is quite an important tendency of this electoral campaign. If you read these posters, people are making jokes, and those jokes are quite peaceful. I have really the feeling that people just want to get rid of the president. They're just tired of him after 26 years, and they would even be happy, when they could even buy themselves, so to say, with their money, some ticket for him so that he goes away. It would be acceptable for the society. I don't know whether it would be acceptable for Lukashenko himself, because he never saw, has never seen any other life as life in power.
I suppose we'll just have to wait and see for that one. We're approaching the end of the program. I'd like to get a political overview, Jenny, if I may. Russia's security, it has always said, depends or is tied to its neighbors. So my question is, what happens if the ties between Russia and Belarus are loosened from the Russian perspective?
Do you mean what happens for Moscow?
Well, what happens for the rest of us as well?
Well, I suppose it would depend on the choices that Belarus would make. I mean, as I said, the protesters have been very clear that they're not seeking to leave Russia's orbit and move westwards into the EU or NATO or any of that. So I think Belarus actually is quite satisfied with being close to Russia. They just want more opportunities to make some choices for themselves. And this is the question: is whether Putin and Russia are willing to see that as an acceptable alternative to much more sort of close domination by Moscow.
And what are the choices they particularly want to make?
The Belarusians.
Yes.
I think, as my colleagues on the panel have said, they really seem to have, a different vision of the future in terms of who should be leading them, and that they should have the opportunity to make that choice.
But what does that future look like?
well, probably not something radically different from what it's been in the past in terms of how the economy is organized. It wants to be more prosperous, of course, but not an open free market for everyone, and not the extremes that we've seen, I think, in the transitions in countries like Poland or indeed in Russia in the 1990s when it got very difficult to live in a market economy. So I think they wouldn't want something quite as harsh as that. They would still want social protections, but they just want a bit more choice and freedom.
So a fairer, more equitable society with a slice of the cake for many more people than have it at the moment. It seems to be what you're saying. Listen, I want to thank each one of you very, very much indeed for coming on the program. Alexandra, we never did get round to your journey out of Belarus through
Another
Ukraine
time.
and the troubles you had getting to where you are now in Liverpool, but very much appreciated your thoughts. Also to you, Olga and Jenny, thank you very much indeed for joining us on this round table. From me, David Foster, that is all we have time for right now. We'll be back with another round table pretty soon, but in the meantime, you can catch up on our YouTube channel. For now, though, goodbye.